Amesbury Glass is your go-to place, carrying made-in-Montana pipes and other made-in-Montana goods. Just in stock for summer, hacky sacks and frisbees. Get on out and enjoy the outdoors. We also have an assortment of modern as well as classic gravity bonds. That's at Amesbury Glass, located at 80 East Glendale Street here in Dillon.
Members, and I just thought I'd give a little background how this whole thing came to fruition. Well, it was about back in 2015. One of the local ranchers was hauling riprap rock out of a big sheep crate alongside the road, and the loader he was using kept getting notes left on it by the BLM. You know, come to the BLM office. Well, they kind of conveniently blew away. But then there's a note on there that says you can't haul these rocks because it's been declared a wilderness study area. So myself, being the perpetrator, goes into the office and says, "Wilderness what?" And so then he described what the process was. When they passed the Wilderness Act in Congress, all the federal agencies were mandated to inventory all their lands for wilderness characteristics. And so that rock that we were hauling is part of the Hidden Pasture Wilderness Study Area. And it's just like he said, it was just something that they didn't need as far as work, so they put summer help doing it. And so they used the county road for the boundary on the south side. So the north side of the road is non-motorized, and so the county, when they go to blade the road, they practically have to get an ESA from the government. And the same with Vigilante Electric. Some of their poles are on the wilderness side, some are on the regular BLM side. And so that's what he told me anyway. But so the next year, the Conservation District did a resolution that passed the state association to return Hidden Pasture Wilderness Study Area back to multiple use. And I don't know, time went on, we never heard anything, and about 4 years ago, the Montana Association of Conservation Districts calls me and says that they had the Environmental Quality Council looking through a bunch of their old paperwork, and they found our resolution that never made it to the legislature. And so he said, "Do you want to pursue this?" And I said, "Well, gosh, this is like Christmas in July. Of course we do." And so at that point, Jeff Johnson and I went to the legislature and visited with the Senate House Natural Resources Committee and the House Resources Committee, Natural Resources, and the only opposition we had in both the Senate and the House committees was with Trout Unlimited. And about the fourth time we were in the House committee, and the chairman is Paul Fielder from Thompson Falls, had the opposition up there, and he said, "Well, don't you think 40 years as a study area is long enough?" And so that's kind of how things started, and basically Jeff Johnson and our opposition, the fellow from Trout Unlimited, started this collaborative group. And the Trout Unlimited guy was our moderator for about a year. And so it didn't take us long to figure out that no matter what we decided on Hidden Pasture, even though when the BLM did their checkoff list to satisfy the Wilderness Act, there's 15,600 acres in that group, plus or minus, and the acres that they determined suitable for wilderness was a goose egg. So they sent it to the state office in Billings, and they signed off on it, and it went to DC, and like Tom Rice, one of our county commissioners, said, it sat on somebody's desk until it slid off in the wastebasket. And so that's just a brief history of where we're at today. And so we started that collaborative, it'll be what, I think 4 years this fall, 4 years ago. And it's a group of concerned citizens trying to do something with these study areas besides studying for another 40 years and determine what should be released. That was the resolution Conservation District does. We wanted hidden pasture released to multiple use again. So we've changed boundaries, and we've got some areas that we don't want wilderness at all, and like some up here in the Lima Peaks, that's just obviously, even the locals will say it is wilderness. So there's been some misconceptions about our group, but that's just a short synopsis of what we've been up to for the last 3 years. So Jeff, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Byron. Before I drill down a little deeper into some things, I would like to take just a second to introduce the collaborative to all of you. A lot of the members are here tonight. If you are, please raise your hands. I've seen quite a few walking around, but the who on the collaborative is Jeff Johnson, a local rancher, Byron Martinell, who you just heard from, Representative Tom Welch and Representative Ken Walsh, Tom Rice, County Commissioner, Scott Laird of the Theodore Roosevelt Conservation Partnership, Gene Loader was a citizen at large, Jim Berkey from the Nature Conservancy, Jack Kirkley from Quiet Recreation, Zach Owen from the Beaverhead Conservation District, Casey Hackathorn from Trout Unlimited, Bill Hodge from the Wilderness Society, Parky Scott from Motorized Recreation, Craig Bluebaugh, who is the forester of Sun Mountain Lumber in Deer Lodge, Aubrey Bertram from Wild Montana, Ray Lee Honeycutt from the Montana Stock Growers, Jack Atchison Jr., who is representing the Wild Sheep Foundation, and myself. And our facilitator is Karen Flipovich. So there's Karen, and she's kind of helped keep, it's been like herding cats some days, but Karen's done a nice job of keeping the group together. I would like to touch just a little bit more on what Byron was talking about. So after the collaborative was started, it was also, there were some neighboring landowners that was interested, that was taking part in some of our meetings, that said, well, as long as we're on the topic, why don't we take a look at some other wilderness study areas for release. So one of those was the Bell Lime Kiln. The other one was Henneberry Ridge. So that's how they become part of this discussion. And then also at the same time, it was talked about how can with the Lima Peaks and Garfield and Italian Peak, Nicolia Creek areas already as recommended wilderness and being managed that way. What could be done to try to do something in that space to help permittees and other resource users do business a little bit easier? So that is how that became part of the discussion. But I guess I would like to, I'm going to keep my notes pretty brief. I kind of wrote some things down here so I could stay on point, so we can get down to showing you the maps and letting you visit with the collaborative members and stuff that are here and asking questions. So the collaborative has provided links to any interested party for every work session to date. There has also been grazing permittees, mining, logging, and other resource interests, and local outdoor enthusiasts have been invited, have been encouraged to get involved, and many have attended, providing input that wasn't only heard by the group, but it was also, I would say, most of our outside input was actually baked into this proposal somewhere. And that way Congress, because none of this can ever become reality before Congress acts on it. Wilderness WSAs can't be released. Nothing can happen going forward without Congress acting on it. So what we're trying to do is come up with with a plan to recommend to Congress. It's up to them what they do to it, but understand that throughout this whole process, Senator Steve Daines, Congressman Ryan Zinke has had people attend many. Senator Daines' people has actually been to, I would say, most of the meetings that we've had. Maybe not all of them, but very valuable for input as far as what this looked like and what's the best way to go about this to make what what we're seeking to do catch the ear of Congress, and it's not just our two senators and two congressmen, but there's 430 some congressmen from around the United States and 98 other senators that have to, at least 51% of those have to be on board with this. So it is a big lift. But when we were first getting going, that's the one thing that we heard loud and clear from our congressional staff and from the senators and congressmen is a collaborative approach is something that will. It packs a lot more weight than all of us as individuals trying to reach out to them with what one would like to see done. So I guess another thing I'd like to add is this collaborative is a diverse group. It's both local and regional stakeholders from ranchers, again, timber interest, wildland firefighting, motorized and quiet recreation, to conservation groups, to our own county commissioners. And let me back up just a second. Our commissioners, the reason they're not here tonight is they're all tied up with MACO meetings in Great Falls and couldn't be. It's their annual deal or one of them, and they've got to be up there. So they send their regrets, but otherwise, please know that they've been at this table all along and sharing their input as well. This group has been very transparent in gathering input from all of our peers, reaching out to our trap lines, and this recommendation, like Byron said, has been being worked on for about 3 years now. And secondly, this whole process is, again, it's about releasing study areas and how a better plan can be put in place for recreationists and permittees in the space of recommended wilderness in the area that's been in limbo for many years. I would like to close by saying bad things happen when good people do nothing, but this group has chosen to navigate some sometimes difficult waters. But everyone on this collaborative has worked very hard to make it better, to make a more functional landscape than currently exists. And there's, again, there's a lot of members that are here tonight, so please visit with them. And before we break into an open house format where you can gather info at all of the little stations around, I'm going to ask Karen, she set the room up so she can tell you kind of what is what, but we're all here, so ask, visit, and if we don't have the question, we can probably find somebody in the room that can answer those questions. So thanks for coming out and taking part in your process.
Thank you. Thank you. So I'm housekeeping, Karen Filipovich. So first off, there's sign-in sheets over there. I'm the one who's entering your emails. If you want updates and you're worried, come get me so we make sure I get it right. I'll do my best with your handwriting, but please, if you could, that'd be great. And then I just want to talk about kind of how this is. It's an open house format, so like Senator Wellborn and Byron Martinell said, we want you to talk with the folks. So our folks who are Beaverhead County Collaborative members, if you guys could cluster up, we got 3 stations, here, here, and here. And by the way, they're all the same, but if our folks could kind of cluster up and help you can go around, talk to people, ask questions, and if you have a specific questions like Jeff said, we'll find you the right person to answer.
I do have a question. Is there any funding involved in the WSAs? I've heard, and I don't know if it's true or not, that's the reason that they've drugged their feet for so long to release the WSAs, because they're receiving some federal funding. Is that true?
I'm absolutely not the right person to answer that, but let's find you one.
Went to Bill.
Bill?
What was I couldn't hear the question.
The question was, I have heard in the past that one of the reasons that the WSAs have been WSA for decades is because they receive a certain amount of federal funding, and they don't want to lose that. Is that true?
That is not true.
So
They're WSAs because Congress set them aside as
Okay,
WSAs 40 years ago.
So they don't receive any funding, period.
I would say they actually receive less dollar per acre for wilderness study areas than they do for that's under Appendix Q, which is general management.
Okay.
They don't receive extra dollars.
Thank you.
Thank you, great question. And again, our folks, if we could start splitting up, yep.
I was just gonna ask, is this kind of, this is our draft, this is a work in progress, and you take input from people to kind of alter and make amendments to your plan?
Mr. Johnson, you want to add?
No, the collaborative has made their decision. It's taken 3 years to get there.
So this is kind of,
But as you know,
Where we
as
are.
Senator Wellborn said, you want to talk about the congressional process, it's
Correct. I mean, this isn't the last bite at the apple, because then it becomes, if Congress decides to take it up, then their public comment and public process begins at that point, and that's where they can mark it up any way they want to based on what their constituents' feedback
the
is.
collaborative is done with your work, you're just presenting that to us.
Correct.
And thank you so much for the great question. And again, if you guys could sign in, if you're worried I can't read it, let me know. And then if we could just split up, if we could. Oh, hey, Travis.
You guys have already made this decision, why are we here? Exactly. And what gives you guys the authority to make that vote?
Without us.
Been hiding for 3 years.
We haven't been involved in the process until now.
Jeff, you made the comment that the county commissioners are in on this. I know one county commissioner who has said, I have told Dane staffers Beaverhead County has yet to change on our record on WSAs. They want them all released. So why did you insinuate the county commissioners have been in on this? Tom Rice is on this committee, but that doesn't mean that the county commissioners of Beaverhead County are for all of this. They want the wilderness areas released. And I got that from Mike McGinley. And he's at a MACO meeting in Missoula. That's why he's not here. So please clarify that.
And Francis, that's exactly what I said. Maybe I wasn't.
You made it sound like the county commissioners are
They've
behind
had a
this,
seat at the table all along.
but they don't agree with this.
What is this that you're talking about exactly, specifically?
These two wilderness proposal areas for the Italian Peaks and Garfield Mountain wilderness areas, Mike McGinley told me that they are for eliminating all wilderness areas in Beaverhead County. All WSAs.
Bill, I think you've got something.
Well, I can just clarify what the difference between these 5 areas is. We have 3 wilderness study areas that we worked on. Hidden Pasture, Bell Lime Kiln, and Hennenberry Ridge. And our recommendation on all 3 of those is to release those from wilderness study area designation. We also decided to take on the Forest Service 2 recommended wilderness areas, which is Italian Peaks and Garfield Mountain.
Okay.
The difference between those 3 WSAs is Congress set them aside 40 years ago to be studied, and Congress has to undo that at some point. So we took on, okay, well, what's our thoughts on these 2 recommended wilderness areas, Italian Peaks and Garfield Mountain? And on those, we came to a vote on recommending Congress add that, designate those while releasing the other 3. So it's not like we're recommending wilderness for all 5. We're recommending releasing the 3 WSAs.
Okay, and I'll clarify what Mike McGinley told me. They stand with releasing everything. Okay?
Okay.
And what Jeff said, it made people think that the county commissioners were pro with what's going on with this collaborative. Okay? One county commissioner is on the collaborative, Tom Rice. But he's not on it as representing the ideology of the county commissioners. Because what Mike explained to me is the ideology of the county commissioners of Beaverhead. They want all the wilderness areas released. And they haven't changed
And
that.
Tom Rice made it clear that he was there as a part of the collaborative, but that he wasn't voting on behalf of the collaborative. But they've been at the table, and it's not always been Tom. When Tom couldn't be there, John would come. Mr. McGinley, I don't think has ever been to any of the meetings, but the other two have been alternating. On the Italian, so if nothing happens, because right now nothing happens with this recommendation unless Congress acts on it. If nothing happens, these three WSAs remain congressionally designated WSAs unless Congress acts on it. And the Forest Service recommendations, and therefore the management is recommended wilderness for the Italian Peaks and Garfield Mountain continues until Congress acts on it or the next forest plan changes what those boundaries might be. I just wanted to clarify what the actual situation was.
Thank you so much. If I could, if it's all right, I think this is a great discussion, and as Jeff said, this is a bite at the apple. These are recommendations. We'd love to talk with you more. And so if it's okay, we'll split up into and go around, but our folks,
I don't
BCC
think any of our
members,
answers have been, or our questions have been answered.
I think they're longer conversations, and maybe we could talk about how next steps.
This. Like, it just takes a handful of people to make a decision for us all. That's wrong. And why?
Well, it's like I tell the members of the group, it's a collaborative, so we can't have our cake and eat it too. You know, we all have to make some concessions to come up with the plan, but with regards to the county commissioners, you know, there's three commissioners. It's just like the conservation district, you have to have a majority, you know, to pass things. So I don't know what the vote of the other commissioner is, but we know Mike McGinley is in favor of releasing all wilderness areas. But let's face it, folks, we're outnumbered as far as trying to release this stuff from wilderness designation. Because there's people back in New York that's never stepped foot out here, but they see the word wilderness and they think that's great, so they're in favor of it. But they don't have to live here and deal with all this stuff like what we do, and that we're trying to ease the pain, so to speak, by making suggestions that hopefully, if it gets to Congress, that would be appetizing enough that they would go forth with what we recommended. But so
this part. I went and talked to commissioners last week, and I had all three of them there. I had all three commissioners sitting there, and I asked them, I said, what's your feeling towards this group? And they said, the way it's wrote, we're not in support of it. And all three of them said the same thing. Not one, not two, but three of them told me that. They would not support it the way it's wrote. And I don't support it. You know that. So, I just want you to know that. And in my mind, it said there it takes three of us to kill it. Well, that's three of us, if I got the commissioners. Gene Loader voted no, I voted no, the commissioners voted no.
Actually, they voted sideways the day of the vote. Tom was there, he voted sideways. He did not vote it down, he voted sideways. Because he said he probably had to vote on it again.
But he's got to go talk to us?
Absolutely, he did say that. He said,
But you go ask them today, take a vote. I want to know where they stand. We can't say they're for it. You can't say that.
I don't think anybody said they were for it. I just said he voted sideways. And I guess to try to clarify what, we're a collaborative who tried to find middle ground consensus. I don't expect that all of you, any of you, most of you will agree with what we found as consensus. We're not making any decisions, we're making a recommendation.
There's a recommendation for the Beaverhead
When you
County.
hang around in the middle ground, you get hit by the train or the semi. Do what's right. We don't care about coming together and doing a stupid thing. Do what's right. No wilderness.
Okay, great, thank you. Hey, folks, do you have something on a new point, or do we need to talk in more depth?
A new point, a new question, kind of a broad basic question, I guess.
Yeah.
So I wonder about this BCA terminology. That's a new designation to me, this backcountry conservation area. What does that entail? What does that designation do?
You talking about the backcountry management area designation?
Backcountry conservation
On hidden
area.
pasture, you're talking about that one?
Yeah, that you suggest to designate hidden pasture.
Yeah, that actually is a BLM has a management guideline for what they call backcountry management area. And so we tried to follow the guidelines from what BLM's definition of how they would manage. But that's the one that took the longest time. How long did it take, guys? Probably almost 2 of the 3 years to go through all the details on hidden pasture, releasing it as a WSA and putting it in this backcountry management area while also protecting all existing motorized access and improving right-of-ways for improving the road. Like as Byron said, there was issues with the boundaries, so we tried to fix the boundaries on that. But there is a sort of a BLM standard for backcountry management, and that's what we recommend. That's what this group recommended with releasing hidden pasture.
And how would that be managed?
So it's managed for motorized recreation, primitive recreation. It has, and that we're going to talk about this around all the maps about what, and we have handouts on all of this to talk about what that prescription is. Like the difference between hidden pasture and Bell, Limekiln, and Henneberry was both Bell, Limekiln, and Henneberry is releasing those back to Appendix Q, which is full. Everything's available. I think in Bell, Limekiln, we said no surface occupancy for oil and gas, but you could still drill from outside it for oil and gas. But in that case, it would the backcountry management area would probably preclude surface occupancy for mining and oil and gas in a place like hidden pasture.
Would you please repeat that? I couldn't quite hear what you said the last part.
The last part? Yeah, so of the, and we're willing to talk about this around all the maps too. On the 3 WSAs, the one that the collaborative spent the longest time on was hidden pasture.
Okay.
It already has, to further muddy things, there is already an administrative designation of an area of critical environmental concern that we're not addressing with this collaborative. Our suggestion on hidden pasture is to release it as a wilderness study area and recommended a large chunk of it for backcountry management, and we have a very detailed description of what that can and cannot include that we've got in the handout. The other 2, Henneberry, or Bell, Limekiln, and Henneberry, we deferred to Appendix Q, which is sort of BLM's general management, with the one exception in Bell, Limekiln, which is to preclude surface occupancy for oil and gas.
Well, and the road segments.
Where do you want the minerals and the oil and the...
Yeah, like it would still allow mineral extraction, and if you want the oil and gas, they can get it coming in from private land that surrounds Bell, Limekiln, which was based on feedback that we had from the geologists that came to these that were from Montana Tech.
How about timber harvest?
You can still do timber harvest. Oh yeah, that's all available in Appendix Q on all of that. On Bell, Limekiln, and Henneberry.
Well, what about on the hidden pasture?
I don't remember what
There's no trees there.
I don't think it says that about on hidden pasture whether to address that directly or not.
Okay, and again, thank you guys. I'll be listening, and if there's big themes, like I heard several of you say no wilderness, we appreciate that. We'll want to hear, but we really like to share with you more details. So if we could, again, there's a station back there where you guys are, a station here, and a station over there, and grab me if you're looking for something specific.
Real quick, I would recommend doing it by show of hands. Is the room here?
I got a job. Why was going to put this in groups here? I think we're having a discussion here, and I think everybody wants to know what everybody else has questions.
Yeah. Do you have a group meeting?
We have a vote of hands. Station, you get rid of it, so you guys don't have to answer the question.
That's what I'm recommending.
We're hoping
When you say this though, this isn't specific. You gotta be specific. How many people are in favor of releasing the WSAs? I think that's a simple question.
Only if it's multiple use.
All WSAs.
The WSAs
Okay.
are in the
Well, there you go.
recommendations.
See, there's really no conflict between this group and the coalition that I can see. I think they're lockstep.
So hopefully we can get, thank you, hopefully we can get more detail, find out what you think. We'd love to answer some questions. The reason we want to do maps is it helps to really look at the geography and talk with you about it. So if it's all right, we got the three, we'd like to split up, circulate around.
We can probably just sit here and do what we're doing now. We all have our maps.
So they can always respond.
Actually, it's not so we control you, it's hoping to answer questions. Yes.
Yeah, so I've got a question as far as Beaverhead County Collaborative. It's specific to down here, when you keep talking about the Beaverhead Deer Lodge and that. So how does this relate when it gets back to Congress with other wilderness study areas in Beaverhead County?
It's a great question. And you guys want to, any of you want to talk about your kind of your vision and how you were trying to get stuff through Congress, get it moving?
Blake, kind of, there was discussion around that, and it's just trying not to take too big of a bite at the apple. I mean, it's taken us 3 years to get to here, and kind of with the group, you know, if the band stays together, if you will, then maybe start talking about some of the others in other areas, but then bringing in more local stakeholders, ranchers or whatever that actually have management experience on the ground. So I mean, it's kind of a, how big is too big and how big is not enough, and we felt that there's enough here that it might at least start a discussion with Congress, and then, you know.
So this is pretty site-specific
to the
what's going on here and what you've done does not have any connection to anything else.
Correct.
But as you go forward, like the wilderness or WSA between Dillon and Wisdom, if you would look at that one, would you pull in people like from the Big Hole or from the immediate area of that WSA? Because here, there's only 4 landowners and they're south of Dillon that's on this group right now. But if you're going to be looking at the other 8 WSAs, shouldn't you include people from that area?
That's the whole idea, Francis, and that's what's happening. And that would be up to whoever started that collaborative or whatever, if there might be some members of this group. Yeah, there's, I mean,
See, that's kind of what's gotten some of us people a little upset, is that you're trying to speak for all of Beaverhead County, and we're saying, wait a minute.
I don't know where that's coming from.
Well, just the way, you can look at the stuff that you published in the Dillon Tribune back in December 2023. You said, it is the goal of the BCC to collaboratively draft recommendations for each WSA. Well, if you go and see who y'all are on this collaborative, there's none of us, you know, from the Big Hole or from north of Dillon. So we're going, wait a minute, we have a voice in this too. We live here.
No.
And over half of your people on this collaborative live outside of
Beaverhead County.
Well, that's a good point.
See, you know, that's what a lot of people in here are going, wait a minute, we need a voice at the table too. Yes, you're trying to represent us, but truly represent the group. Look at the people here. We're from all over the county. We're not just south of Dillon, because this is important to everyone in Beaverhead County.
Exactly, good point. But the people on this collaborative are only working on these areas that we talked about. And so it's up to you guys to get your own collaborative in your area and do that.
From this, you make it sound like you're going to be looking at all of the WSA.
If we get this done, there's going to be a lot of us that are moving on to back to where we were getting our work done rather than going to meetings.
Okay.
So
That being said, folks, you hear that?
In the Big Hole.
Okay.
That's my take as a rancher.
All right.
I just have one more point to make. That meeting up there about Dead Man Lake. think you will, you guys said that the WSA up there was gonna take in and going to continue. Then all of a sudden, they put in and expanded, how many acres? How many acres have you expanded the wilderness to be? 3?
All we went with was what the Forest Service currently recommends for wilderness.
But it was
We did try to find.
WSA was employed and continued. It never went past timber.
The current recommendation by the Forest Service for Italian Peaks is what is on this map.
The current-
That's what we're recommending. The current recommendation, which is what, 1996, I think? And then tried to address the roadless acres with defining the motorized access. And Mark and I disagree on what we tried to do. We tried to work on language to protect.
I think that's the way it was, I think you're roadless.
Well, we could certainly consider that.
You're putting.
But actually, we're saying that motorized recreation should be prioritized by what we put in there. But Travis, I mean, we tried to find a compromise on the stuff.
We didn't come to any agreement at all.
Yeah, everybody, they say they want to talk about this, but there was no compromise with the gal from Wild, Montana. She sat there and said, this will not work for my people.
Well, I think that was true for a lot of groups. It wasn't just Wild Montana. I think it was true for a lot of groups.
Well,
we tried to find compromise. We kept trying to find compromise on the boundary on Italian Peaks.
Did you change the boundary?
Not from the current Forest Service recommendation. We didn't change it. And again, all we're doing is making a recommendation based on what we came to.
I would like to know why we need a wilderness area.
Yeah, good point.
It's recommended for wilderness now. It's recommended.
Why?
Well, because the Wilderness Act in 1964, when it passed, which passed by Congress, and it passed in the Senate by a vote of 74 to 12, recommended at that time a certain number of acres of wilderness, but it also, as Byron referred to, also called for the agencies that when they go through their planning process, which they do every 15 to 20 years, and it seems like they then take 15 to 20 years, that they're supposed to go through and inventory areas that have wilderness characteristics, areas that are sort of self-willed, areas in which we'll use as the baseline to how does nature find its own balance when we're not manipulating the landscape. And so that's the reason we have wilderness, is Congress passed a law called the Wilderness Act of 1964, and that law designated places, and it defined for the agencies that only Congress can designate wilderness. It takes an act of Congress, both chambers, House and Senate, have to vote for it, and then it gets signed in the White House, and it becomes law. And that's what happened in 1964, and any wilderness we've had since 1964, that's how it happens. Congress passes a bill. In the case of Montana 40 years ago, they took some areas and said, well, we're not sure it's wilderness, but we're going to set them aside as wilderness study areas. And that was 40 years ago, and Congress passed a bill to do that. And to undo that, we have to release those wilderness study areas. So that's a part of what we're doing here, is trying to release those wilderness study areas. But as a compromise, a part of that is to go forward with what the Forest Service recommended in Garfield and Italian Peaks. I don't feel like I've answered your question, but I'm trying to.
Could I bring something in here? All I've heard as an alternative to WSA is either wilderness or multiple use. That's all I've heard tonight so far. There's numerous other designations. A great designation for the Lima Peaks would be called non-motorized primitive. That's a designation that is not wilderness. It's a designation that can be more locally managed through Dillon BLM or Beaverhead Forest. I say release all this WSA, and if we can get to the ones in the Centennial, that'd be good too. But then we work more with local federal people, and we come up with designations for this land that's been released from Congress, and we go, well, this would be real good multiple use. We need to log that, or drill it, or mine it. This needs to be non-motorized primitive, because we really want to ski or hike up there. Why can't we go that direction and say, all comes out at WSA, no more wilderness, and then let's turn our brains on and come up with help for the BLM Forest Service on what to designate it. We've got to talk about all the different kinds of designations, not counting wilderness.
Yet another designation here, one that I am familiar with this time. But this inventoried roadless that you put on your map here that's in Muddy Creek and then across on the other side of Medicine Lodge as well, that would be a new designation, correct? Is that true?
The inventory roadless designation for all the acres that reaches all the way to the big hole is part of the roadless rule and goes back to the 90s.
That exists now?
That exists now. Some of those roadless acres we tried to address, and we have, as you just heard, a disagreement on what the intent and the outcome is. What I heard as somebody who represents part of the wilderness community was that they were afraid we wouldn't stop with what the current boundaries of the recommended wilderness battalion peaks would be, and that later there would be an effort to come after the roadless acres. I said, well, what if we called it something else? And we talked about a recreation area, and we were told by some locally, we don't want to call it a recreation area because it's going to overwhelm the place with people. And so we tried to come up with a definition that could protect and enhance existing motorized recreation, because what I consistently heard was roads are being closed and there's no alternative to those roads being closed. And we tried to write very specific language on what we're calling the Little Sheep, Nicolia Creek management area to sort of say, here's what actually is possible. It's still roadless, but we can not only maintain existing roads, but we can improve motorized routes and those sort of things. So that's what the intent was. But the roadless acres is sort of baked in from the 1990s, and we did not, that's not us, and that's existed, that's on the current map on the Beaverhead Deer Lodge.
So with the Italian Peaks wilderness designation you propose in the Garfield Mountain, what led the collaborative to decide that those should be taken from where they are now into actual designated?
Well, all we're doing is saying we support the Forest Service recommendation, which came out of their last forest planning process. We added very specific language to make sure that we codified existing grazing permit activities that would be needed or may be needed in the future, improving fence lines, improving water infrastructure, same thing with managing for wildlife. We tried to write a very specific language that would say, we want to make sure we're clear, part of what makes this place unique is grazing. It's been a long time part of this place. It can be wilderness and still be grazed, and we want to make sure that all the tools for grazing. So what we tried to do with how we wrote our concurrence with the recommendation for wilderness that came out of the last plan for the Beaverhead Deer Lodge, if that makes sense.
I'm still wondering, what leads you to agree with the wilderness designation? How come your coalition support that?
Well, I guess I would say enough of us support the idea that some of these places are wilderness, that they do meet the definition of wilderness.
I think it's important to understand that this is a compromise on all sides. Essentially, you want broad support to release WSAs that go beyond the local interests, that having some designation is a way to broaden that support. And I think this is a good faith effort to make a recommendation that we're ready to talk about and hear feedback on. If it's not what you want and you have something else, then
I think that's
possible. But this provides a pathway to release those WSAs that are challenges for your local community. So
I think what I hear in the room seems to be that most of us do not support any new wilderness designations. So a compromise
He's got something on.
of 100 against 5.
Thanks, Karen. I really appreciate you letting this discussion happen, because by splitting people up into groups, it's called the Delphi method. It's a type of engineering, so I can't hear what this guy's asking and you can't hear what I'm asking. I would like to thank Karen for allowing this type of discussion to go on, because a lot of us in this room have put up with this Delphi method of breaking us up, and then you can't hear what everybody else is asking. That's my first point there.
Never heard of this.
Yeah, it's the Delphi
We were
method.
just hoping we could get everybody's questions.
And then the next thing here, Beaverhead County, it was a grassroots group that put this, it's called Beaverhead County Public Lands Resource Use Policy and Plan. You can get these at the county courthouse. I would suggest, if you're interested in this resource use stuff that we're going through, that we've been going through for the last, how many years, Bart? 40 years, something like that. These are available. This was put together with a grassroots group. And there's a lot of people in this room that had a hand in putting this together. This did not have Nature Conservancy money. It did not have wilderness money. It was local people. So please get a copy of this. This right here says, all wilderness study areas pending Congress, which were not recommended for wilderness designation by the Secretary of Interior, which some of these did not fall in that because, you know, they don't meet wilderness criteria. These shall be released and managed for multiple use and sustained yield. This is what the county goes off of. All the county commissioners in 2010 voted this in. There was one prior to that. This is an addendum to this. So if you wanna talk to the county commissioners, go up and say, hey, let's sit down with the resource use plan that we put together. And it's a lawful document for Beaverhead County. Any questions on the resource use plan?
The people that wrote that, JS, was not cherry-picked, correct?
That's correct.
Like this.
It was
cherry-picked, okay.
It was grassroots Beaverhead County people. We did hire an attorney, where was he from? Utah, to put this together. And that's it. It was local people.
Thanks for sharing that history, and I think you had a question.
Yeah, I'm wondering, could the collaborative perhaps produce a map that is maybe with the same legend and the same terms, produce a map that would be the current conditions of this same area? Because some of this is confusing to me and misleading. I'm thinking, well, the inventory roadless, I was assuming, okay, that must be a new designation that you propose. I'm not sure what's new and what's not. And I haven't, of course, seen this until I walked in tonight.
Well, none of us know what's going on. You just drive up a road you've been driving for 20 years and there's a gate across it.
Glad that we
Looking for made in Montana food products? Look no further than Town and Country Foods of Dillon.
We did not try to change one.
I did. I call a spade a spade. Anybody knows that.
It's status quo.
I'm not a politician. I just lay it on the line.
As it is right now, what's motorized, what's open, what seasons, whatever that they decide is on these travel plans. We're not closing one mile of road in this plan. This is just, we supported whatever the interagency comes up with in terms of protecting certain areas, you know, for calving or whatever it is, different seasonal things and conditions on the road. We didn't change one mile of anything. We did recommend that they have a better way of getting access from the north end of, well, it'd be the Bell Lime Kiln near the, you might say, the Horse Prairie end of Clark Canyon Reservoir. A better way to get into that road system up there. We recommended that in our language, that there'd be a better motorized way to get there. And we did talk about, you know, that some of these roadless areas have a way to, you know, loop together, loop routes and so forth, and emphasize that the motorized value of that roadless area outside the wilderness ought to be enhanced as much as possible. We even said if there's a better place for a trailhead than the line you've got written on your map, and there's a better place for turning around your vehicles and so forth that's more ideal, go beyond that line and cherry stem in, you know, a route to that's a better turnaround spot for getting your horse trailer turned around and so forth. That artificial line on that you know, section line isn't the best place for the wilderness boundary to be. Put it in a better place so it's a better place for people to park and to turn around vehicles and so forth. We didn't change one thing about the travel plan map, so we can't answer your questions about why somebody posted a sign that wasn't there before. I've been told I'm in the wrong place, and I went to the sign and said, well, that's only during hunting season that's closed. This is July, and I'm not violating anything in July. That was a permittee that told me I was in violation. I apologize. I said, geez, I didn't know. But no, I can't answer these specific questions about why some roads were closed and weren't closed 10 years ago, but we just supported this. And in fact, the whole gist of this plan is that those things that weren't supported as wilderness, like the WSAs, if you look at the BLM, even though they designated those areas for Congress purposes, they didn't recommend any of those. And so we followed right along with what the BLM said. Those aren't true wilderness because they're already motorized. And so, no, those of us who are wilderness advocates said that's not real wilderness. And so we went along with that. Forest Service did look at those over a period of time in the Garfield and the Italian Peaks, and they said these are true wilderness. We don't have any motorized going up there, and we shouldn't. And we went along with them too. So that balances us out, so that when we get this thing out of this part of Montana, it will fly, because some people will say, well, you've got to balance that deal there because you're going to get some of these areas, but you're doing it based on what the people who manage it have recommended. So we basically, this is a status quo. This is a status quo. Well, I don't know what they closed over the years, but we're just dealing with what this map says now and say that's what we recommend.
Thank you, Jack. And hang on one second, because Mr. Johnson, I actually want one more road. We'll get some more, but I think talking through the hidden pasture mess. Sorry, Commissioner Rice isn't here to talk about the county road part, but I think you know this is kind of an example of how this group tried to work through it. So maybe this will help the specifics.
Well, I think what Karen's talking about is the hidden pasture WSA, right?
Yep.
Okay. So my family holds that lease. When they went out and threw this circle around that WSA, part of it's out in my pivots. I got a road between our two places that travels over the wilderness study area. I've got my irrigation ditch that was there in 1883 or 4, whatever. Martinells have their irrigation ditch in this wilderness study area. Same time period. So what they did was crazy on that one. Same with the county road going up Big Sheep Creek power line, you're part of that. So that stuff would get released, and it gets into a called the BCA, which is permanent, which I like, because I don't have to worry about somebody coming back into hidden pasture at 5 years, 10 years, 20 years from now, and trying to make it into a wilderness area. And it doesn't have wilderness characteristics. Neither do hidden pasture, or neither does Bell Lime Kiln or Hannaberry Ridge. These other two, which I'm not super familiar with, yeah, there's wilderness characteristics, but those are Forest Service and our Forest Service recommended. But for our family, it's a huge pain in the ass. What's going on? And as far as why can I support the wilderness designation? Because there are other wilderness areas that have been set up this way, where the permittee can go in there, mechanized vehicles, an excavator, four-wheelers, side-by-sides, and attend their permit. They can't do that now except with the forest supervisor's permission. So that would become permanent. And I'm afraid, folks, we're not going to get those, my opinion only, we're not going to get these Garfield Peaks and Italian Peaks released from de facto wilderness, which it is now. But there's too many people in the world that won't allow that. But this way, people with permits, and I'm a grazer, not a miner logger, so I'm not going to comment on that. They can get their job done. And that gives us, hidden pasture, the same situation. We can get in there now with side-by-sides. We can't go dig up a new spring because it's in the WSA. If it gets into BCA, then we can do that with rules the BLM has. We can get it done though. Now it's just, nope, sorry, can't do it. So, hope I answered the question. Hidden pasture is really a screwed up WSA. Should have never been put in there.
Which is why, Jeff, I think you advocated that folks get local landowners for sort of the centennials and the pioneers, if folks want to go that way, right?
You mean if they were on a collaborative?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not interested in going to the pioneers and the centennial and just giving my 2 cents worth. I don't know nothing about
Karen. I get a chance to speak.
Jack.
So, my name is Jack Atchison Jr. I'm from Butte. Lived here all my life, born in Butte. I was a wilderness area outfitter in this area, in the Lima Peaks, in Collier Creek, back in the 70s, 80s. A lot of those roads that you guys see on the ridges up there, I might have made them. I was on snowmobiles, motorcycles, horses. I used every means possible to go hunting. It was legal then. And I was asked to join the group as a wildlife advocate. I've been an access advocate all my life as well, but I'm a member of the Montana Wild Sheep Foundation. And so my hat in this collaborative was a wildlife representative. And I was, when I jumped into it, this was a year and a half ago, we came down to the area. I helped guide the group through the various areas so they understood boots on the ground and understood, I know the area really, really well. And I've got to say, I am not a big fan of traditional wilderness. Not a fan. And I made that clear to everyone. I was looking for an alternative, and I kept telling them, we need stocked wilderness. It's a little more inclusive, not exclusive of human activities, just because of the changing nature of the landscape out there. So as a wildlife guy, they could take, and they put a wolverine on an endangered species list, grayling, west slope cutthroat, but if it's in a wilderness area, they handcuff the manager's tools. You can't use aerial equipment, you can't change the landscape, you can't build dams, you can't do that. So you right away, it puts that at odds with keeping animals off the endangered species list. And one of the things that as a wild sheep man, there's about 5,000 bighorns in Montana right now. There's 75,000 sage hens. So bighorns could be used as a leverage to close land or alter opportunity in the future. So what we did collaboratively is looking at these areas, okay, how do we make it more inclusive to management, cattle, timber, still some mining, wildlife management. Now, this is the southernmost region in North America where mountain goats were native to. And they're not doing that great. Bighorns, we know, are doing well. But now with this language, you got to remember, this is, if this becomes a wilderness, we recommended these types of management tools that are different than the traditional wilderness. So now you could go in there and build guzzlers for water, for wildlife, permanent guzzlers, concrete. You could capture them with helicopters and move animals and tag them, and you can't get that done right now. Wilderness areas in Montana are pretty much exclusive. They're off limits for management. They just sit there, and even if they're technically maybe the stronghold of a wolverine or whatever, you can't work with that animal. So we're trying to build some tools and make a softer wilderness with alternatives. So again, I am not a traditional fan. I'm not a fan of traditional wilderness just because it cuts you out. I was a wilderness area outfitter. I saw what it really meant with what I could do as a business person, for instance. So, and I've become skeptical of it. However, it was enlightening to me to work with this group of people, and they came up with some draft ideas that could change how wilderness could be applied in Montana. These areas have been recommended for many years. I didn't recommend them. I fought against them I helped draw the map originally, fighting against it. I was not in favor of it. But if it's going to be wilderness, these are tools that could make it softer. So, and if you look at the map around these wilderness areas, if you take a look at it, there's traditional wilderness areas will often have a buffer zone around it with stingy access rules as well. Right now around Nicolia Creek and so forth, they close it to winter use the 1st of December every year. You can't snowmobile up to Harkness Lakes. It's a quiet zone. Well, what we came up with was a different type of land management that retains all traditional roads and uses. So that would open up areas rather than close areas. So there's been give and take by everyone on it, and it's not perfect, but it's in a draft form, and I would look at the details, the fine lines. And the Biden administration sent some geologists with us last year, and basically what they told me, Biden said, don't you lock up rare earth elements. So, I mean, the people are paying attention to the land a little more than they were in the past when it was a novel idea as far as wilderness. So I think the folks, you should look at this and dig into it and inform yourself and make recommendations. I'm sure we missed things, but this is my 2 bits on it. So that's all I have to say.
Thank you, Jack. And I just want to give a shout out to Tech, which those geologists were amazing.
She's got something she'd like to say.
I'm sorry.
Just a point of question, when they did the wilderness back 40 years ago, didn't they install some sort of a timeline that they were supposed to have to come out? And does anybody know what that timeline was?
Bill, this
I
might be
think
your
they'd asked the agencies to try to get their evaluations done in 10 years. And the evaluations did get done. They've been done for a long time. I mean, like, so the three WSAs that as a collaborative, we're suggesting they release. The agency has said they're not wilderness and should not be designated as wilderness, and that's been that way for a very long time, but that's a BLM.
So what's the holdup then if they?
Congress has to undo it.
So Congress.
The law didn't say it's a wilderness study area until the agency makes a recommendation. It said, it's a wilderness study area. Agency, we'd like for you to complete your analysis in a certain number of years, and they did. I don't know if they met the deadline, but they completed it a long time ago. But it takes Congress, because the law didn't then immediately return it back to Appendix Q or some other backcountry designation. And so Congress has to act to release those 3 WSAs.
There's no sunset, Nancy.
Yeah, it's WSA until Congress acts. But the agency doesn't recommend those 3, hidden pasture, Beltline Hill, and Berry Ridge.
So what's the best source of finding out where those evaluations are?
BLM's website, BLM's website would have a place-by-place definition of why they didn't find that hidden pasture didn't have wilderness characteristics, or why it fell out, and what they actually recommended. And by and large, we went with what the agency recommended as something other than the wilderness steady area designation that it's under now.
Thank you.
And same thing with the 2 recommended wildernesses. To be clear, Garfield Mountain and Italian Peaks are not congressionally designated. They are recommended by the Forest Service in their last management plan from 1996. But they're not designated, so nothing changes about that until Congress either decides to designate them, or the next forest plan comes out and they modify those boundaries one way or the other, whatever. So that's, I just want to make sure we're clear on that. The 3 BLM WSAs will take congressional action. The 2 Forest Service recommended wilderness areas, Italian Peaks, Garfield Mountain, they're recommended for wilderness. We're suggesting as part of our compromise, our package here, that those be designated by Congress while they're removing the WSA designation on the 3 BLM ones. It would take Congress doing both of those things. Like, our recommendation does nothing but just tell Congress, here's what this body of people came up with through our conversation.
I guess I'd like to speak.
sorry.
Jack,
Is it
good
okay
to
if
see
I-
you again. I outfitted in the Centennial Mountains for over 30 years. Cleared about 80 miles per year of trail.
Yeah.
Way ahead of the BLM or Forest Service ever getting up there. Who wants to have a wilderness area? Where's the advantage? If you have a designation, a non-motorized primitive, or whatever designation is, like he talked about, a soft wilderness area, I've never heard of that. But who wants to go up there and clear that much trail with a handsaw? Because that's what you're going to be faced with if you're the permittee on that country. And for the life of me, I can't understand any advantage to the wilderness designation over a non-motorized managed area. That you can clear the trails with a handsaw, you can with a chainsaw, and you can do reasonable things for studying the wildlife and using that land, but it doesn't have to be motorized.
Byron, I think you had something, and then I think if one of you talk about administrative language that you're trying to fix some of that more.
This is just a little tidbit from a rancher's standpoint. We've lost about 25% of the ranches in this country since the 80s. And one of the things that this group is adamant about, I don't care if it's the wilderness stuff up here or the WSA stuff down this way, the collaborative group is adamant about keeping grazing going in all these areas, because we have to keep cattle on the landscape, because the ranchers are going to go out of business. They have a tough enough time as it is. So if we reduce their grazing, then it's just that much tougher. So that's one of the things that our group has been adamant about, is maintaining the grazing rights.
Hey, Byron. Question, Byron. If you're keeping for grazing land, then it can't really be a wilderness land, can it?
You can graze in the wilderness, yes, they do.
Well, I'm talking, I'm talking about shut off areas.
Bill, yeah, Byron, I think you have some, and then Bill, I think you maybe have a little more too on that question.
But not grazing the wilderness?
No,
Yeah,
I'm
and about
talking
kind of
about
the-
how can it be a
How
total
that
wilderness area if there's grazing on it? Because, from my understanding, wilderness areas, we're not even supposed to be screwing around on,
I think it's a good question. I would call it part of the compromise in the Wilderness Act, is that we said that we would continue to recognize historic and current grazing rights, even in a place that's designated as well.
So like Mel says, why can't they designate it as just a roadless area, you know, for a particular spot or whatever, and get rid of this wilderness crap?
Well, it is, to be clear, all the areas that are recommended wilderness are also already inventoried roadless areas. So they are inventoried roadless. The agency process, which involved a thorough environmental impact statement process that took years and years to do, had enough feedback to say that they thought those acres, the acres that, again, we're just talking about Tying Peaks and Garfield here, met the definition of wilderness. We agreed, but said we want to make sure that the wildlife management that Jack referred to, or the grazing management for permittees who have grazing right in there, are a part of the function of the place. I call it a compromise. I hear what you're saying, but that was part of the compromise in the Wilderness Act, is that we would continue to allow grazing. The question has come from the other side of the room a couple times about about why wilderness at all. I'm a wilderness person. I used to run the Bob Marshall Wilderness Foundation, and we would get more than 400 volunteers a year who wanted to pull out across cut salt.
Yeah,
keep the trails
you won't
open.
be there on June 15th when I gotta get a string of mules.
I hear you, I understand.
I guarantee
We've been 3 years on a allotment up there in Sheep Creek right now trying to get a water development on it. We can't get the Forest Service to do it. I don't know what it'd be like for people to study.
Well, Ross, what we tried to do is actually write specific language that says grazing is a part of the function of the place.
You have grazing, you have to have management.
And we wrote the definition on all of that, the use of, plastic water lines and putting in guzzlers and motorized equipment to maintain fence lines. We tried to write that definition.
We can't even get that done on the non-study areas.
I'll make a point there if I can.
Yeah. If it's okay, Mr. Johnson could maybe explain
Ross
what we're
makes a
trying to
point
fix
there.
here.
John Gravity, president of Montana Stock Growers, said, if this wilderness passes the way you guys have it written up, he said, you're gonna have less restrictions as a permittee there than I do on my Forest Service permit that has no designation. Because they're just having hell with the Forest Service. They won't let them use side-by-sides. They'll let them use mechanized equipment, some on the springs and stuff. But he said, I'd rather have that you're talking about.
Yeah.
So.
Right, could you guys expand a little on, I think, just to make sure everybody's clear that you want it written in congressional legislation so that the administration is clear? I'm not awesome at this, one of you is better.
Our agreement on the recommendations for wilderness on the Tying Peaks and Garfield Mountain was under these set of parameters, and we wrote those definitions, and Jack and Scott Laird and I worked on the language about providing the bandwidth for management for wildlife and fisheries in both of those places, and then worked with the grazing permittees about what we wanted to make sure we protected in any language. So the agreement is not just, oh yeah, we're fine with it being wilderness. It's like designated as wilderness with these parameters so that management of the grazing permit continues. But we even heard feedback about making sure that we didn't let that lapse just because maybe a current permittee let it go, that grazing would remain a part of the function of the place. So we wrote that language and agreed to that language as a group as we went forward on those two places.
Yeah, I think you have a question.
I guess my question to that would be, you really think Congress is going to pay any attention to that? Seriously, I think what Mel's talking about, for me, is easier to swallow in that I'm getting rid of these study areas, but I'm not in favor of designating these two other areas as wilderness. I think a different classification that makes it easier for the agencies to manage and for the people that want to use it to manage. A different kind of designation would be swallowed a lot better by most everybody.
Thanks, Ray.
Piggybacking off of his point, I'm wondering, why didn't your coalition just simply propose to release the wilderness study areas. I was told over here that your goal was to change nothing from the way that it is managed. So why don't we just go back to Appendix Q, release it from wilderness study area? Why do you add different stipulations to many of these areas? Why don't you just support Senator Daines's legislation that said, let's release all WSAs?
I think there's enough citizens that don't want to see that happen. There are constituencies, I mean, across the state, across the country, these are U.S. taxpayer land. And so there are constituencies who are going to be pissed off the other way, that we're releasing 3 WSAs. I mean, we were trying to find a middle ground there. But there are going to be constituents that also are going to be pissed about the WSAs. I hear the room, so I'm not deaf. I mean, I've listened to Park enough. My ears work. But there are constituents, there are other constituents, maybe they're not represented in this room as much as those who don't want to see the wilderness designation, who will be pissed about the WSA release. And so we were trying to find a way to move forward with some things that can make management practical. I understand, I hear the argument about the idea of, well, why do wilderness at all if we're going to, I mean, it's trying to find something that can be broadly sold across a range of interest groups. And because there's a lot of interest groups that have a voice in this. I mean, there just are. I understand the Beaverhead County voice is incredibly important to that, and we're hearing it, and we've been hearing it in these meetings and the people that we've brought into these meetings. But I'm sorry, I went on too long.
Could I also get one of you to talk about the 2 WSA areas that you did some tweaks to? Because I think your question was, why not just go to Appendix Q? So hidden pasture, and then those really promoting the possibility of new road segment in Bell Limekiln. When you guys want to talk about that too, because I think that's the other piece you kind of work through. I don't know, Mr. Johnson, if you want to.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Let Blake in. Yeah. I just want to say that, I feel like this group, the collaborative group, has done a great job. They've done more than anywhere else. They've tried to, I think, have a meeting of the minds, and, from a ranching standpoint, I'm probably going to play devil's advocate here, but we do have to recognize that local is the best way to try and, I think it's from the grassroots up, but you've got to go into it recognizing that, there are people out there, and I think the word wilderness means something to them. But with that said, what I'd like to understand here, listening to Jack, listening to Mel, and I believe your name's Bill, is, we can get hung up. I've been on one of these groups when I was down in this area a few years back, and spent a lot of time on it, so I can appreciate what this group has tried to do. And you can get caught up in semantics, it gets to be torture, a definition. You're trying to find what this means and what that means and everything, but I'm going to play a little bit of a devil's advocate here and just ask the question, as far as maybe this group, a little bit of clarity with administration in terms of, Mel, what you're asking is a primitive roadless versus what would be the difference between that and wilderness designation. And what I heard is in one case you're going in with a handsaw, in the other you couldn't have a motorized saw. Is it bigger than that, or am I missing something?
No, it's bigger than that. I think wilderness is a place where, I think from a scientific perspective, we see a chance to have a baseline. What if we do nothing? Because at one time we got it wrong. We thought all fire was bad, and we suppressed every fire when it started. And we found out we were kind of wrong about that. And so wilderness represents those places where we can kind of see how nature finds its own balance, still being mindful of being able to protect private resources from catastrophic wildfire, for example. So I'm not ignoring that piece of it, but it is bigger than just using a chainsaw versus using a crosscut saw. It's this idea of a few places, and it's not a lot of places, but a few places where we can sort of be humble and say, okay, what happens if we kind of let things play out and find its own balance? There are a lot of current pressures to do active management of things, because of pressures on species populations, and that's why we wrote this specific language. But in general, those who support the idea of wilderness, and I'm one of them, and I understand that that's not popular notion of this room, but I'll own it, is that it's a place, it's one of the few places where we just sort of say, maybe we don't have all the answers, and we can see how the answer plays out when we let nature play its own course out. Because we've been wrong before. We used to think zero predators meant unlimited prey, and we found out we were wrong about that too. So
I guess my question was more about what's the difference between that and primitive rodents?
you use the word semantics. I mean, it is semantics, but the word wilderness does mean something to some people.
The people in this room that want the line of pigs to be wilderness, if we saw a show of hands, and then I'd like to see who stood on top of that Garfield Mountain. Who's for wilderness up here on Garfield? Raise your hand. Have you ever been on that mountain?
I mean, other than on our field trip,
Yes
I've been
or
on top of
no?
that mountain. No, I've not.
Okay.
I've been up to Coley Creek and been into the
lost
Italian
count.
Peaks.
I've been up there 12 or 15 times.
But I speak for people who may never see it.
In my means to protect that country. But wilderness is a bad deal, and you can see that the people don't want it. So I hope you get that.
I'd like to address one of the things that Blake was trying to get at. And I've had the same question is, so what's different if it's just BLM normally operated, or if it's in a wilderness study area, or if it's in a wilderness area, what changes? I can tell you the wilderness study areas and wilderness areas, their interface with the other lands that they join make a big difference. If you guys remember when we had the fire in 2003 in the Centennial over there on the south side, because there was a wilderness study area there, they didn't do any fire suppression there. They came over across the road and did it all on their own private ground. Mel had to cut the trees around his house, but they wouldn't cut in a BLM because it was a wilderness study area. So there's designations. Those designations do have an effect on interface with their neighbors. They really do.
So what is the difference in your mind between primitive roadless and wilderness in that scenario?
That I could swallow. It to me that would limit the amount of vehicles that can go, but and give some protection, but it doesn't put a lot of those bigger tiered responsibilities of management on the agency that holds their hand, that ties their hands. The other thing that I can tell you, this map here, and it's beside the point. These areas that are hashtagged all around here that are recognized as inventoried as roadless areas. Sue was on the rack back in 2000s, and I served on some of the subcommittees when BLM was redoing their management plan. But at least in the Centennial and the Blacktail and a lot of those areas that I was familiar with, there's a lot of that hashtagged area that says it's roadless, but it's only because they plowed a berm up at the end of an old logging road or a trail that was used by the sheep people to tent camps or log for many years. That's the way it is in the Centennial.
That's a great question. Is it okay, because these guys actually talked about that issue quite a bit. Maybe one of you all want to sort of address how you're thinking about this whole road things. I think you brought up a great thing, and this group also was worried about it in those inventoried roadless areas. You want to talk about that kind of joining area?
I think I've talked enough.
A collaborative
we tried to codify keeping roads open and providing the access to actually modify and open new routes. That's what we did with the Little Sheep and the Collier Creek management area, was to try to say, quit treating this as an area where you just have to close the roads, and actually treat it as an area where we can manage for motorized access, improve motorized access. That's what we tried to do. We can decide whether we got it right or not, but we tried to recognize from hearing feedback on saying you have, and actually we heard it from Megan, the Forest Service employee that was there, that it would actually give them clearer direction than they currently have on what the mandate is for those acres about preserving, enhancing, and creating motorized routes. And that piece of it, I'm not an expert enough on the rest of the roadless acres outside of what we tried to address on, and I certainly can't speak to why they have been closing routes and whether it's related to budgets and not being able to keep roads up or whatever it is. I don't work for either one of the agencies.
Yeah. Sorry, you have a question.
I guess first I want to say thanks to those who have been working on this. I know it's not an easy road, and I know we're all kind of jumping down in the throat right now, but some of us kind of felt left in the dark a little bit. My interest is definitely at having family holdings adjacent to another WSA in Beaverhead County. And so what this group has been doing sets a precedent, whether positive or negative, for the other WSAs. You may not be interested in participating in them, which I fully understand, because I'm sure this took a lot of your time on this one. But one issue that comes to my mind that's a worry to me is that in the BLM land use plan that's come out recently, it very much looks like they have elevated conservation equal to other multiple use concepts.
Summer days are cooling down, but the deals at Dream Motors are hotter than ever. Stop by 445 North Montana Street and check out these hot deals. Or give us a call at 406-596-1874.
So what's going to happen to those grazing rights if that takes place? Can somebody come in there and change what you're trying to do with the protections that you've written if this goes forward for grazing use on those BLM grounds? If this goes back to, gets released from the WSAs and goes back to the cemeteries?
That is such a great question. When you want to talk about what you tried to write into grazing and what happens when it just goes to queue? Because I think
your question about whether it's precedent setting would actually depend on whether Congress actually does anything.
Yeah.
That's what would set the precedent.
I guess
And also, Congress deciding whether they want to act to stop putting conservation on equal footing with resource extraction, which is what the public ban rule you're referring to is what its stated purpose is. But I think the precedent would come from what Congress, and again, we agree on this with the language that we said, the stipulations that we put on, grazing access and grazing management access and wildlife management access. Again, I recognize Congress can do whatever, but then they would be supporting at least the interest that this group came to, and then there's the interest of this larger group, right? So I think the precedent would be set by if Congress chose to actually do something with this and go forward with it. And whether that precedent is good or bad, like you said, I don't know. I think
Well, I think the precedent is setting grazing as a high interest in this is really important.
That's what we were trying to do with Italian Pete's. We're trying to say it's part of the function of the place. So therefore, it's part of the value. Even as a wilderness, is part of the value of the place. Is grazing is providing an ecological function, and that is what maybe a precedent we would be setting, is to say it's not just that we're allowing it, but we're saying it's a part of the function of the place.
And Jeff, as a landowner, there was thinking about the BLM side of that question. I mean, what do you think? Because we tried to set, you as a language, tried to set some language that would really make it easier for you as an operator. Do you want to talk to that at all? Because that was sort of another piece of it.
None of the grazing permits are permanent. I mean, we do them every 10 years, right? So, I don't know if you can make, a priority is good, I like that. With the BCA would be for our hidden pastures, is part of our BLM. There's 15,000 acres there, that's like half of our BLM. The way that one is set up, and I'm just addressing that one right now, it's permanent. It's not, next year, grazing isn't Yeah, somebody comes in, let's do a wilderness, or let's do a primitive roadless. It's permanent, it's done. Hell, we've all done things we thought were permanent, and 10 years down the road, you're maybe thought, well, maybe I've made a mistake. I mean, you got to do the best you can for the next generations. Now, the other two, that I'm just addressing the BLM, WSAs, because I think that's what you were talking about. I mean, those will be, I don't think the BLM uses multiple use anymore. They got different terms for it, but it would be similar to that. So it's gonna, I guess, depends on, there again, it's going to depend on the mood of the people around whether you're grazing or not, right? And we've always been facing that, right? Yeah. I didn't answer your question very good.
I mean, I'll piggyback on it. So I would agree. So if these WSAs were to be released, they would fall under BLM. So I think what's interesting is, though, if language is put in there prioritizing grazing or memorializing grazing, whatever we want to call it, with the new decision regarding the Chevron deference, that is very beneficial for grazing, because then it is an act of Congress. Chevron deference, if you're not familiar with it, says that agencies cannot interpret policy or make up policy if it wasn't the intention of Congress. So based off how that language kind of is put into any proposal or any new legislation, that I think makes it stronger for potential grazing into the future. And I'm, again, just speaking on those BLM.
Yeah, I'll dovetail off of what Rayleigh is saying. And the people from the Forest Service, I think, framed it in a way that even people like me could understand, but they said, let's just, hypothetically speaking, let's say what we're talking about tonight, and I'm talking not on the release areas, I'm talking on Garfield and Italian Peaks, and the work that's been done to try to write actual language into the plan that is so narrow that it can't be interpreted. If Congress was to act that, what it would do is it takes away the winds of change with a new forest supervisor to be able to change or to put, new rules in on whatever. So I mean, the upside of it is if Congress writes that into law and it's not just administrative rule, then that is the way it has to be rolled out. So if they were to take every recommendation in this and move it, local land managers could not, Forest Service supervisors, whoever, could not change that because it's written in law. So I mean, I'm not saying that's good or bad, I'm just saying that is kind of one way to kind of frame it, as if Congress passes it and writes it into law, then it's cast in stone that the agencies have to follow that, to that letter.
And that has never been done before.
You got a question?
Actually, it's a recent, so the Chevron deference is a recent Supreme Court decision.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I'm sorry, because I think there's a little bit of confusion on what actual wilderness is and what is allowed there and what is not. So I wasn't aware that, or is it true that not all wilderness areas, whether we're talking Scapegoat, Bob Marshall, Lee Metcalf, there's different regulations, different things are permitted. Each one is treated a little bit differently, and that the local Forest Service, let's say it's on Forest Service land, of course, they have the ability to allow certain things to happen, whether it's grazing or certain things you could do there, and it may not be true for all wilderness areas.
Yeah, the Organic Act that designates a certain place after. So all laws sort of refer back to all wilderness designations refer back to the Wilderness Act, but subsequent designations can write organic language that says we're willing to do this for this place, but now some of them won't pass if they completely water down the wilderness idea. There'll be opposition from members of the House and the Senate, and they'll kill it. But a lot of places that have been designated since the Wilderness Act in '64, in their organic language, make specifications that, and I think Rayleigh's spot on about this Chevron deference thing, whether it's the language that we have for Italian Beach and Garfield or this appendix Q, but defining what we think is appropriate, meaning when Congress does that, then it takes away the wiggle room for the agency to decide what their policy trumps. Their policy can't trump what Congress was very clear in their intent.
Yeah, but
but there are wilderness places. I mean, even in the original Wilderness Act, they authorized the use of motors on boats in the Boundary Waters Wilderness Area. Otherwise, they wouldn't have been like, so they're specific in that act. But in subsequent Wilderness Acts, there's been, and that's what we're trying to do here, is saying that we're recognizing these values and we want to bake these values in. Whether it's the designating the wilderness areas or the areas that we're releasing as wilderness study areas. Sorry, Parker.
Can I answer part of your question? There has been wilderness areas written up, accepted with the grazing agriculture language in them, and they exist.
Yes.
So what are the,
I think one of the biggest things with the whole wilderness areas we're talking about down here is the roadless area around it that we can't come to an agreement on. I tried to get it released back to multiple use. Let the Forest Service manage it. That's my goal. And the wilderness, the environmental community would not even wouldn't even think about that. It's a buffer zone to me. It's the next wilderness bill. They're gonna come right out to the roadless areas. If you look at that map, you look at that roadless area, it's big, it's huge. And it takes in fire. You talk about fire, they can't, yes, they can, but they won't. Just like we had a fire in the roadless area this year, up at, Divide. And why can the wind blow the right way? Or would have been in the wilderness? Would have went in the wilderness, and then they would have taken the equipment and their fire would have got huge. I mean, I think it's critical we get this out. And Bill and I, we've argued back and forth forever, and we can't come to an agreement. But I think the group here should be involved in that agreement. Get rid of that roadless, and it takes Congress to do that.
Could someone speak a little to the fire stuff? Because that was actually, it's come up in pieces of a couple questions. Because you guys actually talked quite a bit about ensuring in your recommendations that there is some fire language. You guys want to talk about that at all? It came up really heavily in Hidden Pasture that there was questions about, can we bring trucks in if there's fire, and everybody said yes. Jeff, can you help me there? Because that was
supposedly can, but like Mark said, the administration won't always do it.
Right, so that was part of the language that was in there, right? Is to highlight sort of like grazing. You want to talk to that at all, or cover it
I think you said it.
Okay, but that, I really appreciate that folks have brought up fire, because that's something that's I've heard them talk a lot about and say, just like grazing, hey guys, fire's an issue in this area.
Just like the Chevron deference thing being a recent decision, there's also the wildfire, I forget what they're calling it, the working group that's trying to make recommendations on what to do about our wildfire crisis. And I hope that Congress will figure out what to take from those recommendations. Because I don't disagree with Mark, there's too much. It's funny, we can hear both things in this room at the same time. We don't want local decision makers to be able to just willy-nilly change direction. But at the same time, we don't want them to have so much wiggle room that one forest supervisor will authorize whatever they need to authorize to fight that fire, and the next one won't. And I'm just saying, I think that's going to have to get solved at a higher level on all lands, whether it's roadless or wilderness or multi-use BLM land. They need to figure out how they can make sure they maximize the ability to respond to fire in appropriate and aggressive ways as needed to respond to it. While at the same time, we need some fire on the ground, otherwise we're going to have fuel load problems for our next generation. So I think it's a 30,000 foot problem. We tried to address it here by making clear that we want to protect all values and making sure that we aren't making dumb decisions about not fighting fires that need to be fought, but whether we solved it the right way, I think it's going to be dependent on how they solve it at a higher 30,000 foot level.
They don't live here.
Yeah, I just out of curiosity, I was researching this and it said Montana has 44 WSAs covering 1 million acres. Do you guys know of any other area in Montana that has been working in this collaborative manner to solve other WSAs?
Yeah, I'm part of some. And Senator Daines has a bill right now to release 3 WSAs, 2 that are in the Blackfoot Valley and 1 in the Middle Fork of the Judith. That had, where he basically refers back to the forest, or both the Forest Service and BLM management plans for those areas. Also part of a collaborative that we're not releasing any WSAs because there aren't any in this footprint, but around the community of Lincoln, where we're actually prescribing more active management in roadless areas, 2 roadless areas that are west of Lincoln that need to be managed because they're huge wildfire risk because of diseased lodgepole stands. And there's most recently been in the news work in the Gallatin, Madison ranges around the Porcupine Highlight WSA and figuring out a way forward to resolve that WSA. So there are efforts going on in other places to resolve these long-standing WSAs. And they're a mixed bag of releasing them, releasing some of it, designating some of it, turning some roadless acres that aren't WSAs, but putting more active management on the ground. So this is going on across the state in different places, for sure.
So of those 44, would you say a third of them, or?
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, maybe. I mean, I'm trying to think. I mean, there's some of them that are out in eastern Montana that I wouldn't have been involved in, but I would say, yeah, there's maybe a quarter to a third of them that are being part of collaborative discussions. I mean, this group gets most of its funding from something called the Montana Forest Collaborative Network, and they're funding collaboratives like this across the state. And one of the big things that those collaboratives are tackling are these congressional wilderness study areas. Not the only thing, but it is one that a lot of groups are tackling.
So you are getting funding, as you said, from the Collaborative Network?
Collaborative Forest Network.
Collaborative Forest.
Forest Network, yes.
Forest.
And they're just supporting collaboratives that are trying to find broad-based, community-fed solutions to issues like WSAs and areas that need to be managed. Anybody else know that answer where the money for the Collaborative Forest Network comes from? I think it's grant money from the Forest Service and BLM, I believe. I think it's coming from the Forest Service and BLM. And it's a small group. They don't have a staff, but those who are on the committee are mostly made up of like retired Forest Service district rangers.
Or DNRC.
Or DNRC.
Thank you.
So I'd like to ask a question.
Yeah.
So it looks to me like on this, I'm trying not to be ignorant, but it sounds to me like instead of wording this thing as Beaverhead County Collaborative, it'd be more like special interest collaborative. Because everybody on the group has a special interest, right? And it seems to me like you're engulfing all of Beaverhead County into a collaboration that we don't get to vote on. And the next question I'd like to ask is, when does this go to Congress? Who hands this to Congress as a representative of Beaverhead County? That none of us got to vote on, whether we agree with it or not. I agree you went through a lot of work, and maybe this is the best answer, but Beaverhead County didn't get to vote in this. I don't know, there's a dozen, 14 that did, but you sounding like it's Beaverhead County collaboration. I guess I don't agree with that. But when does this actually get handed to Congress? Where? Is it state Congress, federal? Because it looks to me like the only way that we have a vote is to write our congressman and say we either support it or we don't. And is that true?
It is federal, so it would be United States Congress. I don't think that there is a plan right now to hand this and say, please go act on this, though.
So is that during this administration, the next administration?
There's no way that it'll be introduced during this Congress. Congress will start over.
But nobody has a date when this is going to Congress, right?
What's that?
Nobody has a certain date that this is going to Congress.
No, we don't have a certain, but I will, as Karen mentioned earlier, Senator Dane's staffer has been probably at 80% of our meetings. Congressman Zinke's staffer has maybe been to 50% of our meetings, and they came to the field trips that we went on. I hear you, like at some level, how big do you make it to where it can't function? We tried to find a level that had different interests. Your point, there are different interests at the table, and just tried to find a way that broad-based, but we're never going to be able to, I mean, if we tried to have everybody who has a voice in this, which would go to people beyond people in Beaverhead County. Maybe you're right, maybe the title's wrong, but it was just an attempt to geographically say
Well, it sounds
what
to me
we're
like
focusing on.
I'm in this Beaverhead County collaboration, and I've never even heard of them before. So the whole county looks like it's being represented by this group. Now, I agree, something has to be done. But I don't remember anybody getting a vote on it. And it looks to me like it's a done deal. That you're gonna hand it to them and say, this is the Beaverhead County. I don't agree with that.
That's good feedback.
So our only vote is the right Congress, our Congress.
So
But this is
Congress,
going federal, you say.
Congress has a process. Do any of you want to talk about it? It's as mysterious to us in some ways, but none of this gets changed without an act of Congress. Unfortunately, it's just the way the law works. But do any of you want to talk about, because like Dean's a staffer, she's been really good about talking to people about, hey, you know, this congressional process takes recommendations, takes further input, also has to figure out how to get through Congress. Do any of you want to talk about it more? But she's been especially good at talking about that piece.
I mean, I could talk to the three bills that I've been a part of, and to just be realistic, the Pure Lands bill that I was a part of, we had to have it introduced 5 times. It took a decade. Every 2 years, Congress starts over again, and if it didn't pass in those 2 years, it starts over again. And in subsequent introductions, it got tweaked, it got changed, generally because the member either heard from the public or whatever. But it generally takes, particularly on something as complicated as this, it's not like Senator Daines is going to take what we recommend, introduce it in January, and in February it becomes law. I personally, just being candid, I would be shocked if this turns into law in the next decade. That's just the reality of these things. It takes multiple introductions. It takes our delegation working with other members of the delegation to find things that they want, to support what members of our delegation want. There's been a few things I've been a part of that maybe went faster than that, but lands bills in particular, it's a long-term slog. This is not any kind of finish line. This is, if anything, a walking up to the starting block.
But does this collaboration, though, actually incorporated collaboration with the ID? I mean, are they incorporated? Or do they have any teeth? Do they have any representatives? Is it just a group of people got together?
I mean, Jeff could speak to more than that. I mean, we're not a nonprofit. We don't have I mean, it's a group of people that, we have a charter. We have a charter.
This group right here could be called something else, and not just as much teeth as it makes when you guys have.
Could you explain what the charter means in your essence? What does that mean?
So, I mean, Jeff can speak to it more than I can, but there was sort of like, okay, what is this group's goal? Which originally was 4 areas. It was originally Hidden Pasture, Bell Line Kiln, and Italian Peaks and Garfield. We added Hidden Berry, but the original charter said we're just going to focus on these areas. We're going to have this many people on the collaborative. This is how our voting process works. This is how decorum in the meetings goes. I mean, Karen, you can maybe speak to it better than I can, but it's basically the set of parameters under which we operate.
Yeah, think about it as kind of the operating manual. And then the Conservation District is kind enough to act as the sponsor for any funding, not very much, but and post stuff. Zach, you want to speak to any more on what the CD does?
The CD, that's why this group exists, is because these bills, they've tried to pass these bills in the past. saying release all the wilderness study areas or designate, and they always get a bunch of opposition from the other side once it hits a statewide or national level, and so it tanks, it goes nowhere. So we were basically tasked, the people that were showing up from the beginning about hidden pasture, which was the conservation district, which tried to pass a resolution to get hidden pasture released. It was Trout Unlimited and maybe some others that wanted these actually designated. And then that's basically how the group started with Byron and Jeff, and then we started reaching out to locals to try to get a broad interest range. And I agree, I have friends that are wilderness advocates that say the same thing, like, where's my seat at the table? But if we invite everybody that has a stake in this, you can't get anything done. And so there's some level of unfairness in this, and I think that we all see that. But that's our role in it. We are mostly in this because of Jeff Johnson's problems with the wilderness study area. He had a lot of problem managing his cattle. The county had a lot of problems managing the roads. And everyone here, even the people that represent national interest, wilderness interests, have taken local concerns as primary drivers in how they make the decisions. It's, can we move the boundary off the road so that the power company can get to the power line, so that school buses can get around corners going up Big Sheep without getting into danger. And that's basically been the conflict. And I'm speaking a little bit, Byron's an actual supervisor, I'm just an employee of the conservation district. That's been our side, is to help the county maintain the roads, just to clear up this uncertainty of, can we manage it, can we not manage it, can I graze there, can I repair my fence line if it burns down? We're trying to get all that. Yes, you can do all that if we can move the boundary a bit here to get it off the road so you can manage it better. I think that's mostly our stake in this, is to address some of the concerns where they've had problems with these wilderness study areas. We're not necessarily, on our conservation district, you'll find people that are for and against wilderness. JS is an associate member. I think probably a lot of you know what he thinks. I don't really know what Byron thinks about wilderness. I'm kind of like, I think that some wilderness should exist, but I'm not a wilderness advocate. And I don't believe that it should get too much in the way of management. So we're just, I think the Conservation District is interested in helping out locals deal with the designations that we've got, trying to clear them up. And what we talked about here a lot is everything we've done is, you talk about roads being closed, new signs going up, everything we've written in when it comes to road management that we've heard from Parky is open roads, stay open. We're trying to take away the guesswork, trying to take away certainty on an employee deciding we don't have money to manage this, we're going to close it. That's a lot of what we've tried to do, is say that this is now federally mandated, open routes stay open, manage these roads, manage for fire. That's, I think, the Conservation District standpoint on this, is to just get clarity on it and try to help clear up some of the issues that landowners and locals run into.
Great, thank you. And on that note, which I'll give you the last, but I know folks are wearing out, so.
Yeah, so in a collaborative group, as this group was, what I'm hearing, or what I think I heard, was one of the bigger issues is maybe not so much about the two areas that you are maybe keeping in WSA, and the trade-off being amongst the group of three that you're releasing her for, I think it is. There's maybe the roadless boundaries that exist around them. And so when you're actually talking about collaboration, what were the rules of the game in terms of coming to, I guess, a vote, because it wasn't a consensus? In my mind, collaboration meant that pretty much, at least back in the days that I was on the rec, you collaborated until everybody came to an agreement. And it sounds to me like not everybody came to an agreement, at least on the roadless boundary around.
When at first we decided,
so was that a majority rule vote, or how did that come about?
We could have as many as 2 no votes and still have something pass. And we pretty much decided in the beginning that if it had to be unanimous, we would never, because status quo is everything stays how it is. You got 3 wilderness study areas, 2 proposed wilderness. What we're hoping is, because if we just release everything, this is going to get to a national level, it's going to get shot down. People are going to see we released everything, they're going to shoot it down. So we're releasing, but the roadless area, we didn't want to touch it. That's a whole other hornet's nest. We didn't want to go there. Parky convinced us to go there. And we tried, what we're trying to do is provide surety that that roadless area doesn't act as an avenue to expand the wilderness. What we're trying to say is, okay, yes, we want these designated wilderness, but this is their size, no bigger. This is not a buffer. Yes, this is a roadless area, but we're trying to call it something else that says you can actively manage this for fire. You can do some logging here, open routes stay open, you can maybe build some new routes. That's what we're trying to do on clarity, but I think we've tried to be realistic that we're not going to get everybody on board. And so if more than 2 people say no in our group of maybe 12, then we've got a problem. And what we tended to say is if somebody is a no vote, it's kind of their job to bring a solution that would help get them to a yes. How well we've done that, I'm not really sure, but that's kind of that. That's what our charter says.
Yeah, thank you. I actually, you're something really short, is 8. I didn't see a whole bunch of people fading, and
well, all I had is like some of the special stipulations that you've written into the wilderness areas that you propose that they move forward with, like the Garfield Mountain or the Italian Peaks, or different, restrictions or management tools that you'd like to see if they're officially designated. If our name is on that list, can we see a copy of that?
Absolutely.
yes.
Absolutely.
And thank you, that's a great wrap up too. Please, if you haven't signed in, do make your email as clear as you can, because I'm the one typing it. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here and really thinking this through with us. Please take cookies too.